Hello, and thanks for stopping by. I'm currently in the beautiful city of Sarajevo, on the Latin Bridge to be precise, which spans the River Miatska. When it comes to understanding 20th century history and, arguably, the events which continue to shape our world to this day, Sarajevo is key, for it was at this spot, just north of the Latin Bridge, at 10:45 am on the 28th of June 1914, that a young Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip shot dead Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie as their open-topped car came to a fateful, unplanned halt. The assassination of the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne sparked a grave series of rapidly deteriorating events, which, within just a few weeks, erupted into the First World War, an apocalyptic conflict which claimed millions of lives. This was the world's first truly modern war, involving everything from tanks and machine guns to aircraft, poison gas, and flamethrowers. Warfare on an industrial scale, unleashing terror like never before. So intense was the fighting, in fact, that, rather incredibly, the distant thunder of artillery pounding away on the Western Front could sometimes be heard as far away as London. Very few families were left untouched by World War I. My great-great-grandfather, for example, who was also called Robert, was shot at the Battle of Passchendaele in 1917. Fortunately, he survived, although the bullet remained inside him for the rest of his life. And who knows, had that bullet hit him just an inch or two the other way, then maybe I wouldn't be here talking to you now. The First World War, which also came to be known as the Great War, ended at 11 am on the 11th of November 1918, and unsurprisingly, the nations who'd been involved soon began creating monuments to honour the countless souls who died. Britain was no different, with monuments in all shapes and sizes appearing everywhere, from the largest cities to the tiniest of villages. Many years have now passed, of course, and although the memorials remain, it's all too easy for modern eyes to overlook them, as many have faded into the background, becoming little more than another piece of street furniture. And that's a real shame, because many of these plaques and statues hide intriguing stories and details, secrets which, in this video, I'd now like to share with you. And as we go along, I'll also try and bring these stories to life by showing you authentic items from the Imperial War Museum's World War I gallery, a place which I'd highly recommend visiting if you get the chance. Just before we begin, there are two quick things to note. Although a number of memorials have been established in recent years, I'll be focusing here mainly on those which date from the early 20th century. In other words, those which were created in the immediate aftermath of the war. Secondly, although I'll be featuring over 20 memorials, this is only a handful in the grand scheme of things. I mean absolutely no disrespect in omitting certain ones, it's just that there are hundreds in London alone, and it's simply not practical to cover them all in a single video. Having said that, if there are any interesting World War I monuments you can think of which aren't included here, then please do note them down in the comments. It would be nice if we could build a catalogue. We'll begin with the Anglo-Belgian Memorial on Victoria Embankment, which is useful for explaining why Britain entered World War I in the first place. Once Gavrilo Princip pulled the trigger in Sarajevo in the summer of 1914, a complex network of treaties were activated, some uniting nations, others pitting them against one another. One such treaty, the Treaty of London, which had been signed all the way back in 1839, required Britain to protect Belgium's neutrality. And so, when Germany invaded Belgium on the 4th of August, war became inevitable. As Sir Edward Grey, Britain's then Foreign Secretary, famously remarked to a friend as he peered out of a window from the Foreign Office, "The lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetime." Following the invasion of Belgium, around 250,000 Belgian refugees fled to Britain, many of who found their initial shelter at Alexandra Palace in North London, which had quickly been transformed into an emergency centre. Ali Pali was also used as a prisoner of war camp, where some 3,000 Germans and Austro-Hungarians who'd been living in Britain when the war broke out were interred, something which is now commemorated with this plaque. Returning then to Victoria Embankment, the Anglo-Belgian Memorial was first proposed as a gift to Britain by a group of Belgians in 1916, so 2 years before the war had even ended. And indeed, the project was funded by donations from the Belgian public. The sculptor who worked on it was a gentleman named Victor Rousseau, who himself had been a refugee. You can see his signature on the main plinth. Unfortunately, in July 1920, whilst this memorial was still under construction, an unknown intruder, or intruders, broke into the site and vandalised 2 of the models with what's believed to have been a hammer. This led to a night watchman being posted here for some time to keep guard, and the Anglo-Belgian Memorial was finally unveiled in October of that same year. The Anglo-Belgian Memorial also happens to stand opposite Cleopatra's Needle, which, as you can see here, and as noted by this plaque, suffered significant bomb damage during a World War I air raid, an aspect of the conflict which we'll be seeing more of later. Even before the Great War had ended, people, understandably, sought to honour those loved ones who'd been killed in battle, and this led many communities to create temporary shrines, which were later superseded by more official monuments. A superb surviving example of how such shrines would have appeared can be found on Cyprus Street, just off of Old Ford Road in Bethnal Green, where you can see this plaque displayed beneath a collection of flags. This plaque, which is lovingly maintained by locals, appears to be a replica. In the 1960s, Cyprus Street was partially redeveloped, effectively cutting it in two. Quite a travesty really, considering how beautiful the original sections are. When this occurred, the original plaque was damaged, and the broken pieces were put away for safekeeping in what used to be the Duke of Wellington pub. On the plaque are the names of 26 men, all of who came from Cyprus Street. Unsurprisingly, this dreadful toll is believed to represent the highest number of deaths related to a single London street. And in the sad cases of the Dowsets, the Lipkas and the Waffews, there were 2 fatalities per family. A similar makeshift plaque, this one being a roll of honour listing the names of 108 local men who'd served, can be seen on the wall of Biddison House in Chelsea. Born in Norfolk in 1865, Edith Cavell was a remarkable woman who trained as a nurse in London before moving to Brussels in 1907, where she established her own nursing school. When the war erupted, Edith's school was turned into a Red Cross hospital, where she treated all casualties, regardless of their nationality. However, she also used her clinic as a cover for helping stranded allies escape to the neutral Netherlands, by providing a hideout spot, arranging for safe passage, and procuring forged documents. Unfortunately, Edith's illicit activities were soon discovered, and she was arrested by the German authorities on the 5th of August 1915. Then, on the 7th of October, she was executed by a firing squad, a move which shocked people on both sides. This memorial to Edith Cavell, which stands on St Martin's Place, close to Trafalgar Square, was one of the first official war monuments to be commissioned, the land for it being granted by Westminster Council just weeks after her death. However, owing to a shortage of marble, not surprising given there was a war on, the monument, which weighs in at 175 tons, wasn't unveiled until the 17th of March 1920. Taking inspiration from the tomb of the Hungarian painter Mihai Mukachi, which stands in Budapest, the Cavell Memorial was sculpted by Sir George Frampton, who worked on the project at his studio at number 90 Carlton Hill in St John's Wood. The obelisk is topped by a depiction of what appears to be Jesus and Mary, whilst around the back is a carving of a lion crushing a serpent, a common motif on many World War I memorials which represents triumph over evil. The plinth upon which Edith stands is engraved with her last recorded words. Patriotism is not enough. I must have no hatred or bitterness for anyone. Although these were not added until 4 years after the statue was revealed, their meaning supposedly being too forgiving in the immediate aftermath of the conflict. It took a campaign, supported by the playwright George Bernard Shaw, to have them included here. Not everyone was a fan of the Edith Cavell monument when it was first revealed. One critic dubbed it as being toad-like, whilst another claimed it was a very ugly curiosity, comments which, personally, I reckon are a little unfair. What do you think? We'll head now to Hyde Park Corner, where, in the middle of this chaotic junction, you'll find an array of war memorials. The main arch, for example, commemorates 1815's Battle of Waterloo, and there are modern monuments to the forces of Australia and New Zealand too. Perhaps the most understated piece here is the Machine Gun Corps Memorial, which is represented by the so-called Boy David, as in David and Goliath. The statue, which dates from 1925, is flanked by 2 bronze Vickers machine guns, symbols of the devastating weaponry employed during the war, with their grim effectiveness emphasised by a biblical quote on the plinth. Saul hath slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. Interestingly, you can see a miniature version of this statue on Chelsea Embankment, close to Albert's Bridge. Because of the nature of their weaponry, troops in the Royal Machine Gun Corps often found themselves at the very front of the action, which resulted in a dreadful casualty rate, with over 13,700 dead and another 48,000 missing or injured. A profound aspect of the Machine Gun Corps Memorial is that its sculptor was Francis Derwent Wood, who, being too old for war service, had volunteered to work at the 3rd London General Hospital in Wandsworth, which is now known as the Royal Victoria Patriotic Building. Whilst working at the military hospital, Francis met a number of soldiers who'd suffered devastating facial injuries, and so, using his artistic skills, he began to craft bespoke masks to help conceal their scars, some examples of which can be seen at the Imperial War Museum. Francis Derwent Wood's studio at the hospital came to be affectionately known as the Tin Nose Shop, and a good idea of how such masks would have appeared when worn can be seen with the character Richard Harrow, played by Jack Euston, who appeared in the US TV series Boardwalk Empire. On the western side of Hyde Park Corner is another reminder of the Great War's dreadful weaponry, the Royal Artillery Memorial, which honours over 49,000 dead. This bold monument was created by the artist Charles Sargent Jagger, who was born in Rotherham in 1885. Charles had served in the war, including stints in both Gallipoli and on the Western Front, and he was wounded 3 times, his gallantry being awarded with the Military Cross. It's perhaps no surprise then that, compared to other monuments from the era, the Royal Artillery Memorial has a realistic look, so much so that it was deeply controversial when unveiled in 1925, especially when you consider that it bears the covered body of a dead soldier, an inclusion which is believed to be the only representation of a corpse on a British World War I memorial. The monument is topped with a sculpture of a mighty howitzer gun, which again is very realistic when compared to the real thing. This stone version is aimed in a very specific direction. It's pointing towards the Somme. If you look closely, there are many intriguing details to be spotted around the Royal Artillery Memorial, such as this camouflage netting concealing a howitzer, a soldier bearing a wounded comrade, horses dragging a cannon through thick mud, and a makeshift trench sign, real examples of which you can see in the Imperial War Museum's gallery. There is also this depiction of Mary and Jesus tucked away behind what appears to be a hand grenade. And as this inscription says, the Royal Artillery's Roll of Honour is buried beneath the dead soldier. Tragically, despite surviving the horror of World War I, Charles Jagger died from pneumonia in 1934, aged just 48. He's commemorated with this blue plaque at his former home on Albertsbridge Road. Another realistic World War I memorial crafted by Charles Jagger is this statue at Paddington Station, which is dedicated to over 3,000 men and women from the Great Western Railway Company who died in the war. As with the Royal Artillery Corps, their names are all included on a roll of honour buried beneath the plinth. This memorial depicts a Tommy reading a letter from home, which has put a faint smile on his weary face. However, even this was considered controversial at the time. Showing soldiers as being downtrodden and exhausted just wasn't a done thing, and some even went as far to dub it as being ugly, with some high-ups at the Great Western Railway pushing for a more traditional design. Thankfully, Charles Jagger won, and he worked on this figure at the same time as those he made for the Royal Artillery Memorial. As seen here at Paddington, London's railway stations are home to all manner of World War I monuments. Another example is this one outside Euston Station, which is dedicated to staff from the London and North Western Railway, over 3,700 in this case, which bears figures representing all branches of the armed forces. Given its awkward and busy location, this is perhaps one of London's most overlooked memorials, and it's worth noting that, along with the two porters' lodges, it's one of the only surviving features of the pre-1960s Euston Station. Down at Waterloo, meanwhile, how many of the tens of thousands of commuters who pass to and from the main entrance every day are even aware that they're walking directly through a World War I memorial? For the entire Victory Arch, as it's known, is dedicated to over 500 railway workers. It was unveiled in 1922 as part of an overall rebuild of the huge terminal. In my opinion, the Waterloo Arch contains the scariest artwork to be found on such a memorial. This figure, known as Bellona, the ancient Roman goddess of war, who is used here to represent the outbreak of World War I in 1914. As well as perhaps being the only war memorial to house a lift, the Great Eastern Railway Monument inside Liverpool Street Station is connected to a shocking event. The unveiling ceremony, which took place here on the 22nd of June 1922, was conducted by Field Marshal Sir Henry Wilson, after which he took a taxi back to his home at 36 Eaton Place in Belgravia. Little did Sir Henry know that, as he stepped out of the cab, two hitmen from the Irish Republican Army, Reginald Dunn and Joseph O'Sullivan, were lying in wait. They promptly opened fire, killing the Field Marshal on his doorstep. The two IRA men were quickly apprehended by an angry mob, and after being convicted of murder, they were executed at Wandsworth Prison just weeks later. Sir Henry Wilson's assassination is commemorated beneath the memorial with this plaque. Liverpool Street once stood next door to Broad Street, a terminal which was demolished in the 1980s. Broad Street Station had a war memorial too, dedicated to workers from the North London Railway. So where did that end up when the building was knocked down? Well, fortunately, it was saved. Today, you can see it tucked away on a quiet spot outside Hoxton Station. It wasn't only humans who suffered during World War I. Many animals also found themselves commandeered for war duties too, around 16 million in all, according to the Imperial War Museum's estimate. Today, you can see a memorial to animals in war on Park Lane's Brook Gate, which was created in 2004. This wasn't the first such gesture to our animal friends though. You can see a much earlier memorial to animals on Kilburn's Cambridge Avenue, the former Animal War Dispensary, which is decorated with an engraving and 2 tablets, one of which bears the words, "This building is dedicated as a memorial to the countless thousands of God's humble creatures who suffered and perished in the Great War." This moving dedication was unveiled in 1931, although the memorial had been mooted as far back as the early 1920s. Another war memorial featuring an animal, one of the most unusual in London in fact, is the one dedicated to the Imperial Camel Corps, a mounted infantry brigade which operated in desert regions. The Imperial Camel Corps statue can be found in Victoria Embankment Gardens, and lists the name of all the men who died serving with it, many of who came from Australia, India and New Zealand. Rather unusually for a World War I monument, it also acknowledges disease as being one of the causes of death. The Great War marked the first time Britain's civilian population was subjected to attacks from the air, initially by the huge, lumbering Zeppelin airships, and then, later in the conflict, faster, more agile aircraft known as Gotha bombers. This propeller in the Imperial War Museum is taken from one such plane. This small plaque at 16 Alcombe Road in Stoke Newington marks the site where the very first bomb to drop on London landed, occurring at around 11 PM on the 31st of May 1915. Fortunately, the Lovell family, who lived here at the time, managed to escape without injury, and succeeded in extinguishing the ensuing fire. During the same raid, another bomb, which failed to detonate, crashed onto the former Neville Arms pub on the corner of Osterley Road, also in Stoke Newington, and for a time it was claimed this was London's first aerial bomb, with a plaque marking the assertion. However, the council later admitted this was a mistake, and the plaque was removed, leaving behind this glaring mark. Judging by the location of the bombs dropped on Stoke Newington that night, it would appear the Zeppelin was in fact aiming for the nearby railway line. A crew member would dangle beneath the airship in this gondola-like observation device in an attempt to aid targeting, although on this occasion the tracks remained undamaged. Another item held by the Imperial War Museum is this charred map of London and southeastern England, which was recovered from the wreckage of a Zeppelin shot down over Potter's Bar on the 1st of October 1916. Many parts of London were targeted throughout the war, with some of those raids now commemorated by plaques, such as this one on Farringdon Road, outside what's now aptly called the Zeppelin Building, where World War I is simply referred to as the World War, and this one outside the Bedford Hotel near Russell Square. One particular curiosity is this clock, which you can see inside the Dolphin Tavern on Red Lion Street in Holborn. The pub was struck on the 8th of September 1915, with the blast freezing the clock at the fateful time, 10:40 PM. Further south, in Camberwell Old Cemetery, is this small obelisk, which serves as a memorial to 22 civilians who were killed in Camberwell during a World War I air raid. Although as you can see, it's now rather overgrown, with the inscription being pretty much impossible to decipher. On a somewhat happier note, this quaint little plaque in Queen Square near Great Ormond Street informs us that, on the 8th of September 1915, the same night the nearby Dolphin Tavern was hit, a bomb exploded here, and that, although nearly 1,000 people slept in the surrounding buildings, no person was injured. Well, that's a relief. It wasn't only enemy threats from the air that civilians had to deal with during World War I. Many people were employed in factories geared towards the war effort, which in some cases required the handling of dangerous explosives. One such place was the former Brunner-Mond chemical factory, which was located beside the Thames at Silvertown, close to where the Thames flood barrier is now sited. The Brunner-Mond factory was used for purifying TNT, not ideal considering this was a largely built up area. And by sheer bad luck, on the evening of the 19th of January 1917, a fire broke out in the factory, which, in turn, ignited 50 tons of TNT. The resulting explosion was heard over 100 miles away, with the blast killing 73 people and injuring hundreds more, as well as destroying the factory and damaging many of the surrounding properties. This small memorial, which now lies marooned in the middle of a modern development, commemorates those who lost their lives in the Silvertown disaster. Attempts to utilise submarines in warfare had been made as far back as the American War of Independence, although it wasn't until the First World War that these stealthy, hidden vessels really came into their own. If you're claustrophobic, then the National Submarine Memorial on Victoria Embankment probably isn't for you. It features an interesting artwork by Arthur Heron Ryan Tennyson, depicting a cross-section of a cramped submarine, outside of which lurk mysterious underwater beings who, rather alarmingly, are attempting to entangle the sub in a net. A symbol of the perils faced by those who served in such craft. The large plaque is propped up by other aquatic creatures, and another interesting feature are these adjoining anchor-like hooks, which are designed to hold wreaths. A major naval engagement of World War I was the Royal Navy's raid on Zeebrugge, which occurred on the 23rd of April 1918, the aim being to block the channel through which German U-boats embarked upon their deadly patrols. At the Finsbury War Memorial off of Rosebery Avenue near Sadler's Wells Theatre, mention is made of the Zeebrugge raid, and there was once a bronze relief depicting the battle, although that has since vanished. Stolen, I assume. The only remaining such artwork on the monument is this illustration of the Finsbury Rifles attacking Gaza in April 1917. A hero of the raid on Zeebrugge was a young able seaman named Albert Edward McKenzie, a lad from Bermondsey. During the raid, Albert, then aged just 19, was with the first charge, and he ended up being shot in the back and the leg, yet he still managed to operate his machine gun in an exposed position, whilst most of his mates lay dead around him. For his sheer bravery, Albert received the Victoria Cross, and rather tellingly, going by this Pathé News footage of him taken at a ceremony on the Old Kent Road, the experience had clearly traumatised the young man. In 2015, he was commemorated with this modern artwork on Tower Bridge Road. Tragically, within just a few months of receiving his Victoria Cross, and just over 1 week before the armistice, Albert died, not from bombs or bullets, but from that other unrelenting killer of 1918, the influenza pandemic. The guns of World War I finally fell silent at 11 AM on the 11th of November 1918. The relief of those who survived is perhaps best represented by Twickenham's War Memorial, which is located beside a peaceful stretch of the Thames in Radnor Gardens, and shows a cheerful soldier holding his cap aloft, quite a unique and upbeat design compared to other sombre statues we've seen. The Twickenham Memorial also commemorates those women who served, with a depiction of a nurse and a driver beside what we'd now consider to be a vintage motorcar, and there's a group of World War I airmen too. As well as being called the Great War, World War I was also dubbed the War to End All Wars, although sadly of course we now know that to be painfully untrue. The happy statue of the soldier in Twickenham, for example, once stood close to Radnor House, which was destroyed in World War II. Nevertheless, attempts were made in the aftermath to ensure such an atrocious conflict never happened again, one of the main proponents behind this being the American President Woodrow Wilson, who in his famous 14-point speech proposed founding the League of Nations, and on Boxing Day 1918, Wilson arrived in London at Charing Cross station to discuss the issue. The President's visit is marked by this plaque at the station, which is easy to miss, being tucked away above a ticket machine. At Victoria Station, meanwhile, there's this plaque, which commemorates the arrival of the unknown warrior on the 10th of November 1920, an unidentified body who was chosen to symbolise the countless dead who were unidentifiable or had simply vanished amongst the carnage altogether. The idea was suggested by the Reverend David Railton, who'd worked as a padre on the front line, after seeing a makeshift cross in the mud which was simply labelled an unknown British soldier. The unknown warrior was later rested in Westminster Abbey on the 11th of November 1920 in a tomb topped with black Belgian marble. This now sacred spot is the only tomb in the abbey upon which it is forbidden to walk. During the same ceremony in which the unknown warrior was laid to rest, the cenotaph on Whitehall, Britain's central war memorial for all British and Commonwealth forces, was also unveiled. The cenotaph does indeed have plenty of secrets to tell, but that's a story for another time. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this look at London's World War I memorials, and as always, I would love to hear your own thoughts. What other memorials can you think of? And what connections does your family have with the Great War? Please be sure to let me know in the comments. If you haven't yet subscribed to Rob's London, then I'd appreciate it very much if you could please consider doing so, as this, along with clicking the bell icon to receive notifications, will ensure that you don't miss out whenever I publish a new video. Plus, of course, it'd be wonderful to have you along. If you're feeling extra generous, you can also support my work with a tip via either my Ko-fi account, which I'll link below, or the YouTube thanks button, which appears as a heart icon beneath the video. Any such financial donations are of course greatly appreciated, and they really do help go towards creating content. Anyway, on that note, thanks again for watching friends. Stay well, and please be sure to stay tuned.